Well, good evening, everyone. No? This is Don Sutherland from the Living Incomes for Everyone campaign. And what Tony used to be, he's now retired, but he used to be the economics analyst for the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union, Unions South Australia. Over to you.
Thank you, Don, and welcome delegates from the mass movements. Look, I'm going to tell you this morning about the budget and why I think it's a budget for the top end of town. I'm going to run through all the numbers on debt and deficit and the jobless economy. And looks perfect, all right. So you can see what I'm saying there, that the Treasury and the Reserve Bank predict unemployment will reach 10%. They changed their tune for a while when the budget came out and there was a political fix, but now they're back to the 10%. And new actions and measures are needed if we're to create jobs, to restore full employment, or to even get back to where we were before the crisis. And I might say one final thing about myself. I'm not an economist by trade. I'm just a delegate off the job who's learned a few things about budgets and economics while working as an industrial officer for the unions over the years, over the last half century. So a budget for the top end of town involves giving businesses a $27 billion handout. A few companies are missing out, but they're now lobbying to get back into it so they can get their snouts into the trough. The handout allows businesses with a turnover up to $5 billion to claim full tax deductions. Otherwise, the budget is the traditional hard right effort covered by a thin layer of social justice to hide what's in it. There's nothing for those who've lost their jobs since the labour market collapsed, but that has been happening for some time, as we can see. It's not just a feature of the health crisis. All this has been building for many decades, but particularly since 2014 with Tony Abbott's disastrous and unfair budget, which I described as a budget of economic vandalism. And you can see the ratcheting up of the underlying unemployment rate over the years of this century. So the jobless economy has seen thousands of businesses destroyed, up to 3 million workers unemployed, and 37% of the workforce without paid work of any kind, and that doesn't include the millions who are on JobKeeper. And we've seen the biggest falling GDP since the Second World War ended, and public debt is forecast to reach 1.7 trillion. It's higher than what we were told at the time of the budget. And what we know is that unemployment will stay high for up to 10 years. It'll take that long to create enough jobs to get back to where we were in February this year. And based on the experiences of previous downturns, as you can see on the screen now. So if we're going to get back to full employment, we have to have a successful manufacturing sector, and we need to replace imports. And there's a problem with doing that. And that is that the Australian dollar has been falling in value over years since the GFC, but the sales of imported goods and the share that they make up in the economy has continued to grow. And you can see the red line, the exchange rate of the Australian dollar, and the blue line, the imported goods, rising inexorably since about 2015, despite the dollar going down in value. It's kicked up a little bit with the RBA pump prime in the economy recently, but the imports have continued to flow in, notwithstanding the economic shutdown. And so what we need to deal with that task of creating new jobs are various things. One of them includes a shorter working week, and here we have some women demanding a 30-hour week back in the 1930s in Sydney at a march organised by the Communist Party of Australia, which is what the Free Tom Mooney placard is in the background. The other measures we need are a worker-friendly tax system, which I'm proposing and calling for, which would tax company turnover and wealth and realise more than $1 trillion over the next 10 years. Tax cuts that favour low-income earners, and that's particularly women who are at the bottom of the heap in the pecking order, and replacing imports, as I've said. Over $200 billion in imports could be replaced to create over 300,000 secure full-time jobs. And the key thing about those jobs is that they would be climate-friendly jobs, creating a sustainable economy that was decarbonised with equity and social justice, which we'll come to shortly. Now, the key thing is going to be paying for the coalition's handouts to big business and the top end of town. And when the bill arrives in the mailboxes, I suppose it mostly arrives digital these days, so it'll arrive in people's in-trays. We know who's going to be paying most of the bill, because 46% of all tax dollars are collected from PAYE tax earners, that is the ordinary Joe and Jane worker. And when you throw in the GST, you're getting up to more like 60% of all tax revenues. So we really do need this worker-friendly tax system, which I've thrown in additional from the presentation on the night of the original live public meeting. And you can see the details of where the dough's pulled from. The cash flow tax, which is set at about 5%, different rates for different industries, 800 billion. Levies on accumulated wealth and inheritances, 200 billion, and an online entertainment levy. All of these rates are suggested by the tax system that applied during the war that was devised by the wartime Labor governments of Ben Chifley and John Curtin. And so let's go to the environment. One of the things that I'm saying about the budget is that while all the media and commentariat have been talking, and Facebook have been talking about tax cuts, the real scandal is the lack of support for our fragile environment. The coalition's budget has $9 billion in expenditure, 0.5% of GDP. But Joe Biden, who looks like being, we can only hope, the next president of the United States, says that he's going to spend $2.8 trillion, or 9%, more than 9% of US GDP, in comparison to what the Australians are spending. That's a considerable amount of dollars, and one which is embarrassing for the coalition government. Despite the government's lack of support, the renewables share of the electricity market is continuing to grow. As you can see, 28% of the whole market is supplied by renewables, but it's up by nearly 6% over the last year, while fossil fuels are down by 1% in a slightly smaller market because of the economic shutdown. So where we are, we're in crisis. We know it's bad, but who is responsible and what does it tell us? Well, the particular nature of this crisis is that government's management of it over the period since 2013 has been abysmal. They've been looking after the top end of town and letting the rest look after themselves. They've mismanaged the economy, and they're going to put the bill on the back of ordinary PAYE tax earners, which is just not good enough. So the question becomes, what are we going to do about it? And we're really charging on through this, Don. The question isn't one of debating, going over numbers, posting on Facebook our outrage about it. We've got to get active. We need a broad alliance of mass movements. That is the labour movement, the social movements, all the people who are active to fight injustice as they see it in their own eyes. We need a sustainable and equitable society that inspires people to get out of their lounge rooms and out into the streets. And we need socialism with a human face, which I define as being as including industrial and political democracy, not just voting every 3 years, full employment, and that is real full employment, jobs for all who need them, and a sustainable economy. And I mentioned a just transition process, just something about that. If a small proportion of the funds needed to decarbonise our economy and society was pumped into a just transition fund that invested in new sustainable jobs and community infrastructure, that would create hundreds of thousands of jobs for regional communities so that they weren't worried about their futures and the futures of their families and their communities. We need to solve this division between in the labour movement and across society over the environment, because if we don't, the coalition will come up the middle and once again be able to prevent the needed social change that our environment and our communities are so urgently demanding and looking out for. So we come to the final message. It's no use complaining, it's no use getting angry and sitting around saying, cursing and swearing and calling the Prime Minister lots of names. Sometimes things need a kick along because not a lot happens unless people get out in the streets or walk off the job. And this is certainly one of those times, as Joe Strummer sung back in the 1980s, if what's happening isn't good enough for you, well, get out in the streets, get active and get even. And thank you, Don, and all the best to all the delegates tuned in.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. And I think what you've provided us with is a big picture overall big picture of the economy and its interactions with the decisions of the government as captured in the annual budget.